Hi, my name is Carey Holzman, and today I've got a brand new computer build video for you. Today's build is designed around a need for the client, and the client is a senior center where a number of people use the computer lab, and they need to use it for things like, well, primarily this machine will be used for Ancestry.com research, and it may do some other tasks as well. However, because a number of computer users will be using this computer, it's going to get a lot of use from a number of people who aren't going to be necessarily computer literate. And so the client said, look, we need something that's going to be very reliable. We need something that's going to be easy to repair or upgrade if necessary. And we don't have a lot of money in the budget, so we need it to last us as long as possible. So for that reason, I've selected these components. What we've got is the Corsair 200R. This is Corsair's best-selling computer case. Next, the EVGA 430 watt 80 plus power supply. This power supply is more than adequate for our needs because we're not installing any discrete graphics card. There's no gaming being done on this, except maybe solitaire or something like that. And even then, probably not, because there will be a line of people waiting to use this computer. Now, for the heart of the components here, we've got Windows 10 Home. This is the i5-6600. And for RAM, we've got 2 sticks of 8 gigs, that's 16 gigs. Now, you should always install your memory in pairs. You don't have to, but for the best performance, I recommend installing in pairs. And I recommend installing no less than 8 gigs. So we're going with 16 here because we want room for them to grow into, and as the software becomes more advanced as the years go on, we want this computer to be able to keep up with that as much as possible. For the hard drive, yes, finally you're going to see me install an M.2 drive. So we've got an M.2 drive here. Now if you recall, this is very similar to the M-SATA drive that I installed in the NUC, the Intel NUC, and I'll reference that just a little bit later in this video. We've got an optical drive here. This is just a standard CD, DVD, reader, writer. When you buy an OEM optical drive, it just comes in a plastic bag like this. That's the benefit. You're not paying for the retail box or the retail packaging that's included with that, which may be sometimes a cable, instruction manual. All that stuff is just filling up the landfill, and it's costing you more money. So yes, it just arrives in a plastic bag, which is fantastic. And then for the motherboard, you'll see I've used a number of these boards here. This is an H170M DS3H from Gigabyte. Now, the beauty of this system is, if you use the parts I've used here, let's say you don't need an optical drive because you're a gamer, you don't want the optical drive, delete it, you don't need it. The motherboard, as long as you're using the 170 chipset motherboard, you can use any socket 1151 CPU. But because we need to use the onboard graphics, we need to ensure that our CPU has the Intel HD graphics built into the CPU, which this one does. Intel HD graphics 530 is the model. It's written right on the side of the box. In fact, I'm not even sure if they make Skylake processors without HD graphics, but verify it, because these things change in the future. And that's the beauty of the system. As I mentioned, you can use a Core i3, Core i5, Core i7. For the hard drive, you can use a mechanical drive, a solid-state drive. This is an M.2 solid-state drive. So it's very easily customizable. If you wanted to add a video card to this system, you could add a card from AMD or NVIDIA. You'd have to upgrade your power supply to power that card. But again, you could use any power supply you wanted to. So it's really that easy to design your own computer once you have the baseline. Once you decide, for example, you want to build a socket 1151 Skylake-based system, which is the latest, then make sure you get a 170 chipset, Z170 if you want to overclock it, or really into performance. The H170 is the other chipset I would recommend. So let's get started. So here's our instructions that came with the 200R. We know what to do with those. And let's get this turned around so you can see what I'm about to do here. If you haven't seen this before, I have a number of other videos where I demonstrate this, but just in case this is the first video of mine that you're seeing, we'll go ahead and show you how to remove the side panels. There are 4 screws, 2 on each side, that hold the side panels in, and these actually came out of the box loose, which is good, so I didn't have to use the screwdriver. Now these screws that we're taking out, we want to put these screws away because the very last step in building the computer, after everything is just absolutely completed, wire tying and everything is, cable management's done, operating system's installed, and everything is functioning, the very last thing we're going to do is put these two side panels on and secure them with these screws that we're taking off right now. So depending on how long it takes you to build your computer, make sure you put these away somewhere where you're not going to stumble over them or accidentally scratch or dent them, and don't lose these screws. So to remove the panels is very easy. We just pull back on it. It comes back about, I don't know, ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch, and then it just pulls straight off. You'll see one side has no holes on it. And then we'll do the same thing here with the other side. Again, if I turn this around, maybe you can get a better look. We're going to slide that back. Watch right here. Slide that back. It only goes back, like I say, just about ½ inch, 3/4 of an inch. Comes off, and you'll see this side panel has holes for optional fans that can be added. So let's set these aside, get them out of the way. Now, one of the first and easiest components to install is our optical drive. Let's do that and get it out of the way. So I'm just going to turn the case around this way. I'm going to push out this top bay. Now, I could use any of the bays here. I like the looks of the CD drive or the optical drive in the top bay. It's my personal preference. You may choose otherwise. And you can see the unboxing of the DVD drive, since it only comes in a bag. It's pretty straightforward. There's no cables or wires or instructions or screws or anything that comes with this, and that's just going to slide straight on in. Now, on this case, on the Corsair case, you see there's a little metal latch here. And if I pull back on it, I can then slide the drive out. If I push it in, if you get resistance like I'm getting, just pull back on it a little bit and wait for it to line up with the mounting hole. Sometimes you have to wiggle it around and it locks in just like that, and you'll see it's completely flush with the front. So right here in one of the hard drive bays, there's a cardboard box, and if I pull back on the retention lever here for the hard drive, this box will slide out like so. And this is the box that has all of our mounting screws, and that's what we're going to need to secure everything into position. So if we open this up and empty it out, you'll see, there we go. We don't need that. We've got a couple bags of screws here. Now, there's some really long screws, and there's some motherboard standoffs, and there's some fan screws. So out of the 5 bags of screws they've given us, we only need 2 of them. And then they've generously given us some nylon zip ties. This is really important to keep your cabling looking nice and neat. And that will also help upgrading and diagnosing and repairing in the future a lot easier if your cabling's nice and organized. Now, we can secure the optical drive in place with a screw just to lock it in. Now, this computer is being hand delivered. I'm not shipping it, and you don't have to put these screws in. But you know what? We've got the screws, and there's no harm in doing it. Now, what can happen if you don't do it? Well, what can happen is you're moving the computer, and the drive comes loose. And when the drive comes loose, who knows what can happen at that point. Now, you know, if the cables fall off and they start moving around inside the case, depending on how you've packed it for travel, you could damage the computer. So I always recommend putting at least one screw on each side. So here we're just going to grab these very thin threaded screws. There's basically 2 types that we're looking at, a thin thread and a coarse thread. And the thin thread goes onto the optical drive. The coarse thread is going to go onto mounting the motherboard. It's really that simple. And I'm just going to line it up. I've got an option to install a screw on the bottom or on the top, or both. If you want to go overkill, you can use them both if you want to, but that's just going to make replacing the optical drive that much more difficult if you have to take out all those screws. And then I'm just going to do the same thing here on the other side. If I turn this around, here we go, turn that around, and you might get a better view when you go right here. There's really only one place we can put this screw. There we go. That optical drive isn't going anywhere. The final step of our cage preparation is the power supply. So here we'll get our power supply unboxed, and your typical power supply will have a power cable with it. They all don't. Most of them should, though. Instructions, we know where those go. On the flap here, there's usually mounting screws. There's some tape, but the screws are missing. They must be down in here. Power cable, set that aside. And we can go ahead and remove this bubble wrap from the power supply. You'll see there's a fan on one side. This fan sucks air into the power supply, so we want this to face the bottom of the case. There's a little filter right down here, and just bear that in mind so that when you find a place to put your computer, that you're not putting it on carpeting or something that, flat carpeting's fine, but shaggy carpeting, anything that could block the ventilation is basically going to result in a very expensive vacuum cleaner. And there's a little bag of screws that had fallen in there. Empty box, don't need it. Installing the power supply, very, very simple. We're just going to set it down, again, fan facing down. We want the cables facing the back towards the motherboard tray. This right here is referred to as the motherboard tray. On some cases, this whole tray comes out. There's a metal lip here, and I just want to put this power supply underneath that lip and make it flush with this motherboard tray. Then I'm going to push it back and make it flush with the rear of the case. Just like that. Perhaps not so much force. It doesn't have to bang that loudly. The coarse threaded screws that are used to mount the motherboard in the case could also be used to mount the power supply, but I prefer to use the screws that came with the power supply. They're a bit more heavy duty. They are black, which is the right color to match our case, which is always a good thing. And we're just going to put one screw in each corner of this power supply. And you'll see there's a number of holes. We don't use all these holes. There's actually 2, 4, 6, 8 holes that are optional, and we need to use 4 of those 8. And the reason there are 8 of them is that if you flip the power supply the other way around, if for some reason you have to or need to flip that power supply the other way, like for example, it's going to be on shag carpeting where it's not going to be able to breathe well, the power supply can do that. It's just your cabling is not going to look as good because your cables are then going to come out from the edge, but the case is accommodating for that, and it's a great consideration on behalf of the engineers who designed the case. So I would just want to start these screws. I don't want to tighten anything down yet. Just want to make sure that all the screws are going in correctly and that we can shift the power supply left and right in order to line up the holes so the screws will go in there without any resistance. Now that I've got them all started, just take a minute to note that of which holes I'm using here. You'll notice one corner is offset by about an inch on the inside. And that's an important thing to note, because if you try and put screws in here or in these vent holes, you're going to be working a lot harder than you have to. So let's go ahead and tighten this down. You don't have to do opposite corners on this. It doesn't really matter. And usually I just give them a little bit more torque than what my default setting is on my screwdriver, only because the power supply is heavy. And I want to make sure I flip this switch on the power supply to the off position, just to make sure we're working in a safe environment, regardless if it's plugged in or not. This is just a very good habit to get into. It's always safety first. A lot of times people don't think about safety until it's too late, or you've given yourself a good shock, which we'd like to try to avoid that as much as possible. So here I've got the motherboard box. Let's open it up. See, that's what it looks like on the inside of this one. And the I/O shield must be underneath this. There we go. So we've got our instruction manual, our driver disc, which is right there, and our I/O shield. Then let's go ahead and just put this back in here for now, because we're not ready for it yet. And I don't want to accidentally knock it over or get it in the way of our work. And, you know, it's, it's always more difficult to put things back in the box. Not sure what's up with that. But anyway, that's good enough for now. And let's get this out of our way. So let's remove the I/O shield. Why it's wrapped in plastic, I don't know. I guess they want to make sure it stays fresh and crunchy. I have no idea. Sounds crunchy. Get rid of that. Now, this I/O shield is going to go on right here. It's going to go in from the inside of the case. And it can either go on this way, or it can go on this way. One of these ways is upside down. If you find you've put it in upside down, don't panic. Just push it out, flip it around. How do you know which side is up? Well, generally speaking, all these little holes right here are for your speakers, and those will almost always go on the bottom. It varies depending if you buy a specialty case. Some cases like to flip the motherboard the other way. I don't like to use those cases personally. So for the most, especially if you're following along with this video, for most cases, the 6 holes you see here on the bottom for your speakers go towards the bottom. And then sometimes you'll even have a round hole for a keyboard, which this motherboard still supports the PS2 keyboard or mouse. And that'll always go towards the top, or not always, but in most cases it'll go towards the top. And the way we install this is we just got to get this fan cable. You see we got this rear case fan with the fan cable. Need to get that out of the way because we don't want to pinch that. And then going from inside of the case, we just want to line up that I/O shield with the hole, and it will click when it fits in there. And it's a little bit tricky to do this from the angle I'm doing it on, but it's still a very simple procedure, which is just, you know, rectangular part going into a rectangular hole. Some cases, especially the cheap ones, you really have to struggle with this. And, you know, some people don't really understand why one case costs more than another when they otherwise appear to be having the same features. And this is one great example where a cheaper case, not only can you get your hands cut on sharp edges of the case, not only can you often push on a corner and see the case flex back and forth, but sometimes even getting the I/O shield in can be quite a struggle. So spending just a couple extra dollars for a really good case is going to make your build process so much easier. And if you're a first-time builder, why would you make it discouraging? You know, make your first time an easy build so your chances of success are a lot higher. And as you gain confidence and experience, then if you want to start looking for bargain basement parts, you'll be more likely to succeed building those now that you have this experience behind you. So just something to consider. That preps our case. Now it's time to prep our motherboard. Now getting the motherboard prepped is pretty straightforward. I've got the motherboard in the box here, so first thing we need to do is get it out of the box. Let's go ahead and get this bad boy opened up again. We've got our SATA cables here, which we'll get to a little later. So for now, let's go ahead and take the board out. And I take this cardboard out as well and just chuck it aside. And then I recommend putting all the spare parts, the spare screws, the parts we're removing from the case, and putting them into your empty motherboard box so you have it all in one place. And we're going to build on this box so we don't scratch our countertop up. And we'll go ahead and take the motherboard out of its anti-static Faraday cage here. Let's open it up. And I'm going to grab the board by the edges. Be careful. Try not to touch any of the metal components here on the bottom of the motherboard. It can actually break your skin, just like getting a needle in your fingers. It hurts. And getting blood on stuff is not part of the normal process. I want to avoid that. Anti-static bag, we don't need it. Get rid of it. Now you'll see I'm handling the board here by the edges. And the reason for that is I'm not wearing an anti-static strap. And the reason for that is I don't feel I need it. By handling the parts correctly and by putting myself on the same electrical level as everything around me. So by touching the computer case, even though the case is not plugged in, that's actually what you want. You don't want to be physically grounded to an earth ground. That can be very dangerous. You can use Google and you can research that if you don't believe me. But basically, you don't want to be working on any electronics while it's on an earth ground. It's very, very dangerous. And anybody who's an electrical engineer will explain that to you. So be cautious of the information you get out there on the internet and make sure you do your own verification and research. Even what I'm telling you, verify what I'm telling you is backed up and verified from a legitimate source, preferably one with a proven education and degree, not just somebody who makes YouTube videos for a living, okay? I mean, look, it's up to you. It's your life, and it's your money, and it's your parts. So do with that advice what you will. Let's get back to prepping our motherboard here. Now, as you can see, the motherboard has the video ports already built in. They just simply don't work unless our CPU, as I previously mentioned, has the graphics chip built onto it, which this one does. And we're going to start by installing the CPU. We've got a plastic cover covering our socket, and that's very important because the socket has very delicate pins underneath of it. And the way that this installs is quite simple. Before we open the socket up and expose it, again, because it's very delicate under there, we want to save that until later, until we, in just a minute when we need it. We're going to start by getting the CPU out of its box. So here we've got the Core i5. Now this comes with its own cooling fan, which is more than adequate. I know a lot of people think they need third-party fans. Again, there's a lot of internet experts out there, and this is a decision you can make on your own. Believe it or not, if the CPU comes with a fan, it's not in the manufacturer's best interest to give you a fan that would cause your CPU to overheat or to fail. And so it doesn't make any sense why they would do that. It's not a cost-saving measure if they're having to replace warranty chips and tarnish their reputation. So the idea that these fans are not adequate is beyond silly. But when people push their CPUs beyond their design limits by overclocking, then a more adequate cooling would be necessary. You can verify this for yourself by simply sticking with the OEM fan first, and then monitor your temps and monitor your performance. And then if you want to, go ahead and spend money on an aftermarket cooler and install it, replace it, and see what your temps and your performance are, and then you can decide for yourself. You don't need me or anybody else on YouTube to tell you. But this is always a good place to start. And again, for a general workstation machine, buying the third-party cooler is just a waste of money. I have nothing against third-party coolers, don't get me wrong, but why would I recommend buying a part you don't need? So inside the box, we've got a little hole right here, and you can grab that and slide this out. Right, there's our CPU fan and our CPU right there, and you'll see there's thermal compound already applied. And once again, we go back to the information on the internet. You have no idea how many comments I get time and time and time and time again. I'm sure you're starting to write it out right now. Where's the thermal compound? The thermal compound is already pre-applied by the manufacturer. That's why there's a plastic cover. It's to keep any contaminants from touching that thermal compound. No dust, no fingers, completely clean. We want that thermal compound to be as effective as possible. Inside this box, we also have the instruction manual from Intel and a little Go Faster sticker to put on your computer. So we'll set that right over there. And this box here, this can go right over there. Now, I'm going to turn this box upside down, give it a little shake. Nothing fragile here. There's nothing fragile in this box. Now, here's our fan. I'm going to set that down. I'm not going to need that just yet. Get the CPU out of the box. You've got to pull up on one of these corners, pull it out and away. And then the CPU comes out just like this, and in this box, we're done with. On the plastic here, you'll see there's just a little corner cut out, and you can get a thumb under this, just like so. And that lifts that plastic up. And this is a electrostatic protective plastic, by the way. And then again, we want to hold by the edges. You don't want to touch the top or the bottom of the CPU. Again, not because it's fragile. We don't want the oils on our skin to get on the CPU heat shield. So I'm going to just put my fingers right in here. There's little indentations, and that's what they're for. They're for getting your fingers in there just like that. And take the CPU out. We're done with that. Now the CPU, and again, you see how easy I can almost do it without thinking. I do it so much. It never occurs to me to hold onto a CPU like this, to grab it like that. I don't do that. I always hold it by the edges. And when you see somebody building and they're holding it like like it's a potato chip, they don't know what they're doing. So you'll see there's a little arrow. It's very difficult to see, but there's a little arrow indicated right here. There's also a couple of little grooves. There's one right here, and there's one right there, And in a socket, there's going to be a little arrow, usually somewhere down here, and we can either align this by lining the arrows up, or we can align this by lining up the notches. I prefer to line up the notches, and one of the easiest ways to tell which direction this goes in, because it only goes in one way. You don't want to force it. And I know I've been talking a lot about this, but it's incredibly simple. It's so simple. I just want to emphasize, I don't want you to be careless. That's all. Just pay attention, take your time, slow your roll, and just very easily, we're going to grab this little retaining lever here, maybe I should turn this so you can see it better. We're going to grab this little retention lever here, push it down and away, and it's going to lift up that lid, just like so. And you see how all the writing in the board faces you? Well, we want the writing on top of the CPU to face you as well. Every board I've worked on so far that's a socket 1151, they all go in the same way. But I can also see the little notch here. I can now see the little arrow that I mentioned earlier is right here that lines with this arrow right here. So there's a number of telltale ways. That's at least 3 telltale ways that you can tell which way that CPU goes in. Now, the CPU is not sitting in its socket correctly. If you look very closely, I've set it down gently, but it's raised up on this side. So I need to very gently, again, I don't want to damage the pins that are below it. Just want to make sure that that's in there. If I'm not sure, you can always grab it by the edges again and take it back out, right? Just like so. Grab it by the edge, take it out. And I always start by putting in one side first. Just line up that little groove. There we go. I can feel it when it hits the 2 corners, and then I just gently let it go. And it just rests right into the right place. Now I can lower the lid on top of it, and this little fork right here is going to go underneath that screw. That's the only reason that screw is there. It's going to go underneath of that, and when I push this retention lever down now, it's got a lot of resistance. I'm going to push down on it, and you'll see that just pops up all on its own. Put this in your box, your motherboard box, because if you ever have to remove that CPU and send this board in for any warranty, they will not honor that warranty unless that socket is covered up. It's a very delicate socket. What it costs to replace the socket is about what it would cost to replace the whole motherboard. It's pretty darn close. Unless you're talented and can do it yourself, but even still the part itself is almost half the price of the board. So at least from my sources anyway. So we'll stick that in the empty motherboard box. Now we can install our CPU cooler. So removing the heatsink, not the heatsink, removing the plastic cover off of the bottom of the heatsink now, it's exposing our thermal compound. Look to see where the CPU fan header is on the board. On this board, it's right here. It says CPU fan right on it. And the reason you want to pay attention to that is I want the cable here that's going to power this fan. I want this cable, they wrap it up like this in order to make sure it ships okay and it doesn't get damaged. So you want to make sure you get this all unwrapped here. And I even take it off the little catch right here. Some people don't. I prefer to do that because I want the cabling as clean as possible. You'll see the cables coming out of that side. So we want the cabling, we know that the header that we have to plug into is right here. So the fan can actually go on any direction you want to put it on. It'll work the same. It won't cool any more or less. However, for the cabling to look as clean as possible, I want the fan header to come out in the same direction as the fan header and the fan cable to be lined up. So I'm just going to, you'll see there's 4 holes here, and there's 4 little towers on this CPU fan. We're just going to put that right on top of the CPU. And these should each line up with the holes beneath them. And just take a corner, pick one, push down with your thumb, you should hear it click. Do the opposite corner. Then again, and the opposite corner. That's it. It's done. Then we'll grab the CPU fan header, and that's going to plug right here where it says CPU fan. It can only go on in one direction. CPU fan's installed, and now we can grab one of those nylon zip ties and tie this up. It's easier to do that now than when it's in the case. You'll see how nice and clean that cabling's going to look when that's tied up. Okay, so I got that wire tied, as I mentioned. Let's just get this all sorted out here and give you a nice 360-degree view of where that plugs into the fan header and how that looks all cleaned up, just the wire cleaned up there. And the next thing we can install is either the RAM or the M.2 drive. I'm afraid if I put the RAM in, it's going to kind of block your view. So for that reason, we're going to install the M.2 drive first. Now, it doesn't matter if you use a solid-state drive or a mechanical drive or an M.2 drive or an add-in card drive. There's a lot of different options, but you're going to need a drive. So this is the one I've chosen for this customer because it doesn't use any cables at all. You're just going to plug it into the motherboard. There's no power cable to plug in. There's no data cable to plug in. It's very simple. It's very reliable. It's basically going to give us the same performance as the Samsung solid-state drives that you've seen me use in other builds. There is a 950 series, which can read and write, at least it can read up to 5 times faster than the normal solid-state drives, which is incredibly fast, right? If you're looking at a mechanical drive, you're at around 130 megabytes a second. Solid-state drive, you're at around 550. And then the M.2 NVMe PCI Express drive, which looks exactly the same. You got to watch your motherboard, make sure it supports NVMe and has a PCI Express ×4 M.2 socket. Can read up to 2,500 megabytes per second. And of course, there's a cost difference. This is 120 gigs. I want to say it's around $100, and I think that if I'm not mistaken, the NVMe version of this drive, which is 5 times faster, is twice as much money. So again, budget was a concern here. They wanted performance, but they also had to stay within a budget, and that's why this drive was selected. Now here's what cracks me up. We take this drive out of its package here. Here's what you get. I don't know if you can tell just how small that is. Let me get it opened up here. This just opens up like so. Instruction manual, that can go over there. Plastic. Now there's more plastic. You see, this is the way this has been packaged here. You have to pull this apart. Now, here's our drive right here. Again, you'll note I'm holding it by its edges. Now, I don't know if you can really get a sense of just how small this is, so let me help you out. This is a stick of gum. Yeah? Open it up. Stick of gum. Hard drive. You've heard of a thumb drive? I call this a gum drive. That's good gum. This one's a little more crunchy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, installing the M.2 drive is very similar to how I installed the M-SATA drive. Really, the M.2 drive is the next iteration or next evolution of M-SATA. So, if you recall in the Intel NUC build, this is me installing the M-SATA drive. And you'll see the shape of it is a little bit different. Now, not all M.2 drives are in this shape. It's for that reason, if we look here on the motherboard, we have 1, 2, 3 different mounting holes, and they're numbered 42, 60, and 80. And of course, that's referring to the size of the drive, and the socket is right here. Now, other manufacturers that are concerned about heat generally move the socket away from your GPU and CPU because this is where a lot of the heat's going to happen. So you'll see some of the motherboards actually have the M.2 connectors off into a corner or down towards the bottom of the board. And that's the reason why they do that. They're intentionally doing that to get it out of the way of the heat, because these drives, these can overheat, and when they start to overheat, just like your CPU, they start to throttle themselves and start to slow down in order to preserve themselves, to prevent them from burning up. So your performance can be reduced if heat becomes an issue. Now, we've got no discrete graphics card in here, and I don't believe heat's going to be an issue. And even if this did throttle down, I don't think my customer would even notice because it's so much faster than anything they've ever experienced. You know, it's, as I mentioned, the mechanical drives they're accustomed to are probably running a little over 100 megabytes per second on the reads. This is going to run at 550, and even if it throttles down to 400 or 350, it's still only going to be temporary. You know, it's only going to throttle for a moment until it cools itself down. If it throttles at all, the customer, I'm sure, won't even notice. Now, to install this, they've already included the screw here that's in one of these mounting holes. And the idea is there's one screw, there's 3 places to put it. That's why you don't get 3 screws, you get 1. Now, you're going to need a number 1 Phillips. Usually I use a number 2 Phillips, but this is a very shallow screw, and we need to go ahead and remove that. I hope you're able to see this okay. A magnetized screwdriver is very, very important. As you can see, you don't want to drop that. If you lose it, it's going to be very hard to find another one of those at your local hardware store. I'm sure you can find them online, but best if you just don't lose it to begin with, right? Now, to install this into the socket, it's going to go with the label side up in this case. And I'm actually holding it. You'll see there's stickers on the top and the bottom, and I'm holding it by those stickers. I'm trying to avoid touching the circuit board. And again, as much by the edges as possible as well. The viewing angle here is a little awkward for me to figure out a way to hold it so that you can see what I'm doing. But it's going to put in the socket, we're going to slide it in a little bit on an angle. And we're going to push it in until we can't see the gold here anymore. I don't know if I can turn this around, maybe I can show you. See, there's this gold connector. And when I push this in, it should completely cover that gold connector up so you can't see it. And now it should be kind of springy, like a diving board on a swimming pool. Yeah? Give you all the angles I can give you that. Now, we're going to put that screw we took out, and we're going to put it back in while we hold the board down so it's flush. This does not have to be tight. We just want it to be snug. We don't want it to come loose. That's the only purpose that screw serves. It's just to secure our M.2 into position. Just that easy. Now, installing the RAM, we've got retention levers that have to be opened. And you'll see there's a little writing here on the side of the board. And that writing specifies which modules we're going to use. It actually says we're using DDR4 RAM. This is socket 1. The next socket is socket 3. The next one is 2. And the next one is 4. Why isn't it 1, 2, 3, 4? Why is it 1, 3, 2, 4? Because they want you to use these in offset pairs. So in other words, we want to use sockets 1 and 2 first on the Gigabyte board. ASUS does it differently. I don't know why they do, but we're not dealing with ASUS boards. And if you are buying different parts than what I'm demonstrating in my video here, be sure and refer to your motherboard manual for the best optimal positioning of your RAM. So I know on the Gigabyte boards we're using 1 and 3. That's the gray ones. You see the 2 gray ones, there's 2 black ones. I just open all of the retention ports open, or retention levers open. Take the RAM here, we've got G.SKILL's brand of memory here, and the memory comes with go faster sticker. Yay. Some people are going to say, oh, well, you got red memory in the black board. Why didn't you get black memory? This case has no window, and the memory was a good price, and so we don't care what it looks like. It's got a large heat shield on it. I just want to bend the plastic. Don't bend the memory. Bend the plastic to get the memory out. So that's what a memory module looks like. This is 8 gigs of RAM right here. And you'll see it's got a little groove in it. And we want to align the groove with there's a little plastic bridge. And it prevents the memory from installing in the incorrect direction. So if I try and put this memory in like this, that hole won't align. The memory won't go in. This is something you don't want to force. Again, I'm holding it by the heat shield here. I'm going to install the memory closest to me first for your benefit. Put it in its track. It should slide in just that easy. Then use your thumbs, push down one corner, then the other corner. We're going to repeat with the other RAM module out of the container. Face it in the proper direction, proper orientation. Place it gently in its track and allow it to slide down. You don't see me using any force here. Don't use force. Everything should fit nice and easy. Again with the thumbs, corner first, other corner. It actually doesn't matter which corner you start with. I'm going to push those other 2 retention levers up. Motherboard is prepped and now ready to be installed into our case. So the motherboard has mounting holes that are grounded, and those mounting holes have to align with these standoffs. And you cannot have a standoff where there is no mounting hole. Otherwise, the standoff will be metal grounding against the back of the board, and it's going to be a very, very bad day for you. Now, the motherboard we're using is a micro ATX motherboard. That means it's a little smaller than the standard ATX. These are standards, right? There's the ATX, the micro ATX, ITX, ATXE, and they all differentiate different specifications and standards in the industry for the physical size of the motherboard. You can always put a smaller motherboard, well, not always, you can put a micro ATX motherboard into an ATX case in most cases, but not the other way around, because it would be physically impossible to put something larger into something smaller. It's not a TARDIS. So what we're going to do here is we want to verify that the standoffs, which on the 200R come pre-installed, but they give us this little baggie with 2 extras. And as it turns out, we actually have to use the 2 extras when using a micro ATX case, if you micro ATX motherboard. If you were using a regular ATX motherboard, you probably wouldn't have to do anything. It would probably just fit right in. But either way, you want to verify it. And here's how we verify it. Before I even take these out of the bag, I mean, I know I'm going to use them, but how would you know that if you've never built a computer before and you don't have the experience that I have? Well, we do what's called a dry fit. And what that is we take the motherboard, and you'll see I pick it up by its heatsink. That's the safest way to pick it up. And I always touch the case. I'm always putting myself on the same electrical level constantly. So if I do accidentally touch any metal on the motherboard, less likely to have any anti-static discharge. Sorry, that would be a regular static discharge, not anti-static discharge. Now, if I just set the motherboard down in, and I want to line these ports with the holes on the I/O shield. So generally you kind of put it in on an angle, line those holes up, and then set it down. The center hole on the Corsair 200R has a little peg in it. We don't actually put a screw here. It's got a little peg, and if we push the motherboard in, that little peg comes through and holds the motherboard in position. Now we need to look through each of the mounting holes on this board to see if we can see behind it. And I can tell that we have a mounting hole here, a standoff here, right behind this mounting hole. We do not have one here, we do not have one here, we do not have one here, but the two top ones are okay. And then these outside edge ones are just, again, it's for a larger motherboard. So a regular ATX motherboard could come all the way out this far. This is a micro ATX, and you can see the difference right there. So the reason why Corsair includes those two extra standoffs is because we're missing these two, this one here and this one here. But you say, what about that one? Well, that one is not standard. Gigabyte has decided to go against the industry set standards and to put an extra mounting hole for which, as far as I know, no case manufacturer supports. When I saw a representative at Gigabyte at the Consumer Electronics Show this year, I asked him about it. And he said, oh, well, you could just put a little plastic standoff behind it. And I said, that's what I usually do. It's not required. You don't have to do it. However, the only reason I have those plastic standoffs is because that's what motherboards used to use 20 years ago. And I just happen to have a whole bunch of them. So I suggested to Gigabyte that if you're going to go outside of the standard, that you include the little plastic standoff in the bag that came with the motherboard. I don't think I was heard. So my days using Gigabyte boards may start to be numbered here. When a company starts doing that, devising their own standards, that's pretty much when I start looking to other manufacturers. The reason I pick the manufacturers I pick has got to be for price, performance, reliability, and compatibility. And this removes some compatibility. Now, it's really more of an OCD thing, but the engineers felt it was necessary to put that screw there to prevent the board from sagging over time, but it's not required. So does that make any sense to you? Me neither. So back in the day, we used to use these little plastic standoffs. As you can see, I've got a bunch of them here. I've been in the business a long time, and what used to happen is the cases used to have little holes, little keyholes, kind of like you'd see on the back of a picture frame for mounting on the wall. And then you would plug these into the motherboard, and then the part that's round here would slide into the keyhole, and the motherboard would slide in, and then you'd secure it with 1 or 2 screws in most cases. And so what we do, the way that we make these work, is we just grab one of these. They're all pretty much the same. And you can buy these online. I'm sure somebody on eBay has them, or I don't know, maybe Amazon. I'll have to look. If I find them, I'll put them in the video notes below. And what I do is I use my wire cutters and I just cut the little nub right here off the end. And when I do this, I want to catch it because it'll fly across the room. There we go. So what I've done is I've made the bottom of this flat now. Kind of like if you ever order a pizza and it's got that little thing that keeps the box from collapsing on your pizza. It's kind of like that. This part will just go into the garbage, the little nub we cut off. So what we can do is we can take the board out. I have to lift the board straight up and then pull it back. And for this hole that doesn't have any way to mount, put a screw in there to secure the board, we're just going to put that little plastic standoff in there. It'll snap in. There we go. And you'll see That's going to give the board a little extra support. Again, I want to emphasize this is not important. It's not critical. It's nice to use if you've got it, or if you're just a little OCD like me and you want to be a little extra protective. It's not going to hurt anything to use it, and it won't hurt anything to not use it. So you can make the decision that's best for you. Now the other two holes that we have to use the existing standoffs is going to be right here and right here. The reason I know that is there's no other hole on this side, and I know that the holes are not directly aligned, so I know it's not the one, this one's directly in line. We don't use this one. We use the one that's just a little bit below, so they do not align like you think they might. They don't. That's normal. That's part of the normal micro ATX standard. So here is the bag with the additional standoffs. Now these are 5mm in size, and most computer repair toolkits come with a 5mm socket. I happen to have a specialty tool for this. Basically, I just went to Harbor Freight Tools and bought a ratcheting socket set, and I pulled one socket out of it, the 5mm, and this tool is dedicated for this one purpose. And what we're going to do is just go ahead and put one of the standoffs here. And the other one, obviously, is going to go right here. You want to tighten these down a little bit more than snug, but don't torque them down too much, because if you strip out the back of this motherboard tray, that's your whole case, man. So it's going to be really hard for you to tighten the screws down if this spins underneath your screw, and even more difficult to get the screws back out when it's time to repair, upgrade, or replace your motherboard. So just a little tighter than snug. Now we know we've got the standoffs in the right positions. Make sure we get our cabling out of the way. We don't want to trap any of these fan cables, or, you know, I haven't even undone the front port cables here or the power supply cables, just leaving everything wrapped up so it's keeping our work area nice and clean. Now I'm going to install the motherboard once more. Again, putting the front in first, lining the ports here with the I/O shield, and you'll feel it when it goes in right. I'm holding the motherboard by the heatsink, and then I'm going to push it back and down. And again, that little post holds the board in place. Now I can look through these holes, and I can see the standoffs behind them. And again, you want to make sure there are no hidden standoffs, that there's no standoffs behind this motherboard that we can't see. And the best way to do that is to simply count them off. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total standoffs that we need to be using. And that's including the one that doesn't use a screw, right? We're not counting this one because we're not using a screw here, but we're not using a standoff here. We don't have an option. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So looking at the board, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 standoffs. If I counted 7 or 8, now's your time to get those out of there. That would cause your short. That could fry your motherboard or could fry your whole computer. So again, very simple, but it's important you pay attention. That's all. So here we go. Now we can install it. We know everything's in place. Peace of mind. Line up the I/O shield. Push it forward. Locked in place. Now to secure the board, we're going to grab the bag of screws. One of the bags of screws that came with this case. These are little coarse threaded screws, and we need 5 of them, right? Because we've got 6 mounting holes. One of them is that little peg that stands through there that holds the board in position, and that leaves 5. So let's go ahead and let's take 5 screws out. And I've got 5 right there. And the rest of these put away. We won't need them on this build. However, there may be an upgrade or repair or some additional hardware added later, and you might actually need those, and they come with the case. So apart from having to buy a new case, I'm not sure where you're going to find more of them. So just because you don't need them today, put them away. You might need them one day in the future. So there's the 5 screws. I recommend for most people to go ahead and use a mechanical magnetized screwdriver to put these screws in. Now often you'll see me use my cordless electric screwdriver that has a torque setting on it. If you're not familiar, if you don't use electric screwdrivers a lot, you shouldn't be using them to tighten screws. You should only be using the electric screwdriver to remove screws. If you're experienced with an electric screwdriver and your electric screwdriver has a torque setting, you can use it, but we're only talking about 5 screws here, so I want to play it safe. We're going to turn these by hand. We're going to get them all started. There's no particular necessary order. We just want to make sure that we use all 5. And of course, you need a screwdriver that's going to be long enough to reach. And you can really see how the magnetized screwdriver helps me, because I've got to go into the motherboard top down with gravity here, and it's very difficult to do without a magnetized screwdriver. Magnets are not dangerous to your computer. That was something we used to have a problem with back when we used 5¼ inch and 3½ inch floppy disks and even zip disks back in the day. We don't use that type of magnetic media anymore, except for maybe a mechanical hard drive. But even a mechanical drive has a big rare earth magnet inside of it. So this idea that a magnetized screwdriver would damage anything is just a carryover from the old days. We'll call it the old days. It's really the 90s. But whatever. To some people, that's old days. So we get these all started. And again, it's important to not tighten them down yet, because we want to be able to sort of wiggle the board around in order to make sure that the screws align properly with the standoffs behind the motherboard. Once you've got them all started, then you can go ahead and tighten them down. You do not have to do opposite corners on this. It's not important. You do not want to over tighten this. You don't want to crush your motherboard. So just a little past snug is all you need to do. You feel that screw start to resist, just give it just a little tiny bit more. That's it. And then we'll move on to the final 2 here. We got one right here. And finally, we'll tighten that one down. All right, now here's what our computer looks like so far. And now we get to the stage that a lot of people have a lot of anxiety about, and that's the cabling, all the wires. And really, it's not that difficult. We're just going to take it one wire at a time, and because we're using that M.2 solid-state drive, there's 2 less cables that we're going to have to use. So the cabling is just getting easier and easier as the technology keeps evolving, and building a computer today is easier than building a computer just a couple years ago, let alone 20 years ago. So don't let this cabling intimidate you, because once you see when you handle it one wire at a time, it's really not a big deal. So we're going to start by removing all the metal wire ties that are on the fan cables and these front port umbilicals and the power supply cables. So here on the back, I'm going to go ahead and remove this wire tie here. Now, the reason we want to get these out of the case, these wire ties, is they have a piece of metal inside of them, and as the case ages, this metal, as well as the plastic that covers it, becomes brittle, and it can break off, and often does, inside of the case over time. And then you've got this piece of metal that's exposed, just moving around randomly inside of your case. And what do you think that's going to do? Well, it could short your computer out. So anywhere there's a twist tie, we want to replace that later on with a nylon zip tie that's non-conductive, and it's not going to have the issues that these have. The manufacturers use these because they're inexpensive. They don't expect you to keep them in your case. Sure would be nice if their documentation explained that, wouldn't it? And I'm just going to go through, I know you can't see what I'm doing back here, but I've shown this a number of times on other videos, so we're going to try and speed this one along a bit. And please be sure and check out other build videos if you need more detail than this. I've got them that are 3 hours long, and they cover all the close-up shots and reasons why things are done the way they're doing. So if this is the very first build video of mine that you're seeing and it's inspiring to you, and you want more detail, be sure and check out my other build videos. So let me come around the front here, and let's get all the rest of the wire ties removed. I've removed it off of this fan. Actually, we're not even going to hook up this fan because there's no video card to cool, and this will be one of the first components to fail. It's just the way it is here in Arizona. It's very dusty, and the fans are the things that are going to go first. So there's no reason to have this front fan on. I'm not using it, but I'm going to replace the wire tie with just a nylon zip tie. And keep that nice and neat and tucked away off to the side. We will use this rear fan. In fact, we can hook that up right now. Just gonna, again, remove the wire tie here. And on the motherboard, we're gonna look for a fan header. It doesn't matter which fan header we use, we just wanna use the one that's closest in proximity to where the fan is, because we want our cabling to look nice and neat. And it's not gonna look great if we have to run the cable down here to this corner. So hopefully we have a fan header somewhere. I see one right up here in the corner. It says sys fan. There's a 4-pin header. We call them a header. It's on the motherboard. And this is a 3-pin fan plug. I've discussed the differences between 3 and 4-pin fans. A 3-pin fan will work just fine on the 4-pin plug, no problem. So we're going to just go ahead and plug that right on. It's got little grooves in it, so it only plugs in the right 3 pins, and then the 4th pin just stays there exposed. And again, other videos I got real good close-up shots of that if there's any confusion whatsoever. And then later on we'll get a little wire tie, a nylon zip tie, not a wire tie, and we'll clean this cabling up. But don't worry about cleaning your cabling up until your system's all done. Believe me, the last thing you want to do is get ahead of yourself and have to end up undoing all of your nice cabling because something's not working. So make sure everything's working and is complete before you start cleaning up your cabling. Finally, we have one more zip tie. I'm sorry, I'm just using all the wrong terminology today. We have a wire tie here on the power supply cables. Now, this power supply has a lot more cables than we need, a lot more. So don't worry about that for right now. Don't be intimidated by it, because most of these we're just not going to even use. We want to grab the biggest connector. That's this large 24-pin. It's 20 plus 4 on this connector for this power supply. Some power supplies it's all one, some it remains backwards compatible with the older AT-style boards. We have these holes in the case, and that's there to keep our cabling as clean as possible. You do not have to use them, but if you want your computer to look nice and clean on the inside, choice is yours. I like to use them. I like to take a lot of pride in my work. I like to be able to take the cover off and proudly boast to my customer, you know, just how gorgeous it is inside. And that connector forms 24 pins. It only goes on in one direction. There's a clip on one side that holds it in position, and there's a little notch here that the clip's going to grab onto. So that's how you know which direction it goes on. And we're just going to align that 24-pin plug into the 24-pin connector. And here you got to use a little bit of strength to kind of wiggle it and push in at the same time, and you should feel that connector go flush. And if you give it a light tug, you'll see that it doesn't fall off. If it does fall off, you obviously didn't have it on all the way. Now, the other motherboard power connector is right up here in the corner by where we've just plugged in the system fan, the rear case fan. And that one requires an 8-pin CPU plug. So if we look at our cables, none of these are going to fit, right? None of them. This will not fit. This one's close. This has 8 pins. It's called PCI-E, but that's for a video card. Because we don't use a discrete graphics card in this build, we will not be using this cable at all. But it's really close if you look to these two 4-pin ones that are labeled CPU. One says PCIe, one says CPU. We want the ones that say CPU. Some motherboards use a 4-pin and some use an 8. This one requires 8, so the two 4s go together, just like so. And once more, we're going to clean the cabling up as much as possible, so we're going to feed that through the back. And there's a small hole all the way in the upper left corner here of this case. We can pull that cable through there, pull it through. Again, same as the large connector, there's a clip on one side, and there's a little ledge that the clip attaches to, which faces the outside edge of the board. So orient the connector appropriately. In this case, nothing connects these two together. You just have to squeeze them together with your fingers, and then turn it around so it's facing the proper direction. It really does only go in one way, although, you know, with brute force you can make just about anything go anywhere, but we don't want to use brute force here. Align it with the connector and then push both of them together straight on. You should hear them click into position. Give it a light tug and visually inspect it. Make sure that it's on all the way. And now you've hooked up your motherboard power just that easily. There's only one last thing we have to get power to, that's our optical drive. Remember, our hard drive is an M.2 drive, so we don't have to hook power or data to it. So the optical drive, we need a SATA power connector. And the SATA power connectors are these connectors that look like this. And it doesn't matter which one you use on which cable. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to just randomly grab this one, because that's the one I grabbed. And I'm going to put it in through the wiring hole here. Again, that's optional. Keep the cabling looking as clean as possible. Bring it in through the top. Now I'm going to use the end of this cable. Even though I could use the middle, I want to use the end in order to keep the cabling looking as neat as possible. It's up to you which one you want to use. They both work equally well. I'm going to plug it here onto the back of our optical drive. It just pushes straight on. Next, I can hook up the data cable for the drive. So in the motherboard box, we have a little package that looks like this, and inside of it are two SATA cables. Traditionally, one for your hard drive, one for your optical drive. Again, our hard drive doesn't need one, and you'll see one of these cables has a 90-degree bend to it. So we're going to use this one for our optical drive. This one we're going to put back in the motherboard box in case the customer wants to add another drive in the future. So to plug this in, we're going to take this 90-degree angle and plug it right here onto the back of the optical drive. And again, to keep our cabling as clean as possible, we'll run it right through the wiring hole and then back out right through here, just like that. It doesn't do much, but what it's going to allow us to do is hide that slack, because we're going to have a lot of slack cable here. It'll allow us to hide the slack in the back. Now here's an important consideration if you've never used an M.2 drive before, and this was news to me as well. This is considered SATA port 0, but you also have a SATA port 0 over here. Well, guess what? You cannot have two SATA port 0s in use at the same time. So because we're using this one, we cannot use SATA port 0 over here. We have to use SATA port 1. What happens if we try and use SATA port 0 is when the system does its power on self-test, it will first initialize and recognize the M.2 drive, then it will move on to SATA port 1. So whatever you plugged into SATA port 0 will be ignored. Again, at least by this motherboard manufacturer, Gigabyte. How other manufacturers treat it, I don't know until I get more of them in. However, that's an important consideration because we have to now plug this into SATA port 1, which is normally where it would go. Normally we would have a solid state drive plugged into one of these bays here, which you've seen me do on other videos, and we'd use that other cable and we'd plug it into the hard drive and then the other end into SATA port 0. So again, SATA port 0 is in use. This becomes SATA port 1. You can refer to your motherboard manual to determine if you're using a different board than what I'm showing here, which of these ports is SATA port 1. So we're just going to plug it in just right here, and that's our optical drive all hooked up. Now we've got our front port umbilicals, and that's all that's left of the wiring. All this stuff will wire tie up, and we'll get it out of the way. But all we have to do now is we turn the case around, and when we refer to the front board umbilicals, what I'm talking about is the power switch, reset switch, the microphone and headphone jacks, and the front port USB 3.0. That's all represented through these cables coming out of the top. So let's start with something real easy. So real easy is the USB 3.0 cable. Now normally on some motherboards I would save this until after a graphics card is added. With this motherboard we're not adding the graphics card, and I think even if we were it wouldn't get in the way, but on some boards this actually gets in the way of installing the video card. So you might want to just kind of note that when you're building your system if you're building something differently than what I'm demonstrating in this tutorial. So I'm just going to take this and feed it through one of these holes here, which looks like, yeah, this top one is getting real popular, isn't it? And this is a good time to make sure all the cables remain untangled so you don't have to go back and unplug them and straighten them back out later. And for right now, just feed that in there, turn the case around. And this motherboard, it's very cool. This motherboard has two USB 3.0 external headers on it, which is fantastic. That gives us room to add a memory card reader or some other USB 3.0 device. It doesn't matter which one of these you use, either one works equally well. Again, I'm considering what the computer is going to look like, what's visually most pleasing, and I think keeping all the cables together as much as possible is most aesthetically pleasing. There's a little notch here on the end of the connector, and there's a little groove cut out, and those are going to align, so it ensures you can only plug this in one direction, and it just fits right in there. Sometimes you hear a clicking sound, sometimes you don't. I'm a little disappointed with the standard on this because it's such a large connector that it doesn't have a physical clip on it like the SATA connectors or the power connector or pretty much every other connector we use. Nothing really holds that in other than friction. And when shipping, this is a concern of mine because if this cable comes loose, then it's going to be a technical support call. So anyway, that just goes on that easily. There's only, on this motherboard, there's 2 places where it can go, but if it fits, it's the right place. I mean, that's pretty much as easy as that is. And they are written both on the board and in the connector itself. It says USB 3.0, and it's also in your manual that came with your motherboard. The next easiest connector is going to be our front port audio, right? So we go back again looking at headphone and microphone, and this is again one cable. It says HD audio right on it. And this one I like to run, turn this around so you can see. I like to run this one kind of around all these other cables. And again, this is the time to keep your cabling nice and clean and untangled so you don't have to go back and undo it later when you do your wire tying, cable tying. And we're going to just put that right in there, just like so. Let me just think about this for a second. Yeah, I'm going to put that right in there, and we'll bring it in. Again, this is just to hide the cable. Now, on most motherboards, the front port audio header is somewhere in this corner. And on this board, it actually says F_audio for front audio. And on the connector, or on the plug part of it here, there's a little plug covering one of the holes. It's actually blocked. So that means that this can only go on in one direction, which in this case is going to be facing, the blocked pin is going to be facing down, and you just align the pins and push it straight on. There's no clip or anything. And you just, until it's flush and you don't see the pins anymore, then it's on all the way. Later on, we can worry about cleaning this up and making it look better. Now that I'm looking at it, I don't like it like that. So I want to just move this. Again, this is all about looks. It has nothing to do with the performance or reliability of the computer. It's a luxury to be able to, as far as I'm concerned, make your cabling look nice. It's more important that your system works and is reliable. But it's also important that you don't have cables that are going to interfere with your fan or anything that could cause a catastrophic failure. So the cabling does a little bit more than make it look better. It also makes it easier to diagnose, upgrade, and repair in the future. But if it just doesn't matter that much to you, just make sure you've got good clearance around your fans. You're going to be just fine. Finally, the last set of wires we have to hook up is the power switch, reset switch, power LED, and hard drive LED. And those are represented through these 4 little cables here. And we're just going to run those through one of these wiring holes. I guess we'll use this one. And let me bring this around so you can see what I'm doing. Now again, to keep this moving along at a faster pace, I'm not going to do the close-ups. You've seen me do this before in other videos. If you need the close-up shots, I'll put a link to one of my other videos that has a lot of the good close-ups in it for those of you who need it. What I like about the Gigabyte boards is they all follow the same standard of the order in which these front panel headers go on, or these front panel switches go on. And it always starts, for me, with the hard drive LED. So we're going to look for the one labeled HDD LED, and that's hard disk drive LED, which in this case is our M.2 drive, but don't worry about the wording of it, because technically that's still a hard drive. On the back side, we look for the little arrow that indicates which side is positive. An LED is a light-emitting diode. A diode is something that only allows power to flow in one direction. If you put the connector on backwards, on the right port, but it's just on backwards, your LED simply won't work. You're not going to hurt anything. So what I have to do is put the writing so HDD LED faces down, and on these bottom 2 connectors, I'm going to align the positive cable with the very first connector on the bottom and just push it straight on. Next, I grab the power LED. Same thing, there's a positive and a negative. Now they're split because some motherboards have a 3-pin power connector and some have a 2. So by splitting them, this will work equally well. And on this motherboard, you could actually use either one. But I'm going to put it right above the HDD LED. Again, with positive is going to be above the positive cable on the hard drive LED. So positive is going to be on the left on the very first top pin, and the negative one is on the next pin over. So positive on power LED is directly above positive on the hard drive LED. Same with the negative. Next, we've got our switches. The reset switch is going to go right beside the hard drive LED switch. The next two pins beside the hard drive LED connector is your reset switch. Even though it's labeled as positive and negative, there's no such thing as positive or negative on a switch. Doesn't matter. Just make sure you put it on the right two pins. You're fine. Right side up or upside down, it works equally well. And finally, the very last cable we've got to hook up is our power switch. And the power switch goes directly above the reset switch. And you'll see that I'm turning these with the words facing out so that if I go to work on it or anybody else has to work on the system in the future, they can clearly see what each of these cables are. Even though I've expressly said that you can put the cables on any direction, I'm thinking ahead about how difficult the system's going to be to work on years ahead, when it's been years since I've seen it. Maybe the standards have changed. Maybe cables are going on in a different order in the future. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. Well, I do have a crystal ball, but it doesn't work very well. In fact, I can't remember where I put it. But anyway, the cables are all hooked up, and that's all there was to that cabling you were so worried about. So now it's time to do our very first power on self-test to verify everything we've done so far functions. All right, now as you can see, I brought out my monitor, keyboard, and mouse, as well as an additional power cable. Other than that, we're not plugging anything else into this computer. No printers, no flash drives, nothing else. We just want to make sure that it powers on properly, and we want to remove any option for something to go wrong that we don't need yet. In fact, the system is completely built. If we were adding a graphics card, I would still stop at this point to verify that the onboard graphics does work and that the system does acknowledge the RAM that we put in there and the processor we put in. And what we should see is an error that says there's no boot device. And what that means is that our hard drive is brand new, it hasn't been partitioned or formatted, no operating system has been installed on it. The hard drive manufacturers don't know if you're going to be using Linux or Mac. They don't know. So the hard drive comes blank with no partition on it whatsoever. And Windows will automatically do all this for us during the installation of it, so don't worry about that right now. The key of this is that we want to see the video up here. We want to see text on the screen of either the BIOS coming up or a text coming up saying that there's no bootable device found. So to do that, I've got my Logitech keyboard and mouse, and they're both paired to this one wireless dongle. I'm just going to plug that here in the back. I'm going to use the topmost USB ports. I recommend that. Now the motherboard has VGA out, DVI out, and HDMI out. Doesn't matter which one we use. The DVI cable is just easier for me to grab. It's not as stiff as an HDMI cable, it's just easier to work with, so that's why you'll always see me using the DVI on my tests, except on systems like the Nook, for example, where HDMI is your only option. Finally, the very last cable I hook up is power. Again, making sure the power supply is in the off position, safety first. Go ahead and plug the power connector in and then flip the switch to the on position. Now, if we did everything the way we were supposed to do it correctly, we should see the lights come on, we should see the fans spin, and we should get the unbootable device error. So far so good. I hear the system starting. I see the fan that's facing me is turning. I'm going to step around the table so I can see what you're seeing. As I come around here, it's very important you're patient at this time. Give the system a minute and a half to boot, and we should get something on the screen. I'm just verifying my monitor is in fact turned on. Yes, I see that it's turned on. Not touching anything. Again, being very patient. Just continue to wait. I see the lights flashing here. That's turned off. That's our hard drive activity light, which means it's trying to boot to something and it can't find anything is ultimately what's happening. And here's the message I was telling you about. Reboot and select proper boot device. This is exactly the message that we wanted to see. Now, if we had more things to add to this computer, like a Wi-Fi card, graphics card, this would be the time now to shut it off, unplug everything, flip the switch back off on the power supply for safety, and then continue your build. If you build it all at once and it doesn't turn on, how do you know where to start diagnosing? That's why we do it now. And because the system is a workstation, it's actually finished. And what that means is we can go ahead and install our operating system. I like to update the BIOS first. And I've covered this in other videos, so I'm not going to cover it here. But I'm going to go ahead and update the BIOS, and then I'm going to go ahead and install Windows 10. Then I'm going to clean up the cabling, and then I'll be right back to show you the finished product. As I'm preparing to update the BIOS, I want to take a minute to show you something really cool I found on Amazon. This is a Steampunk flash drive. It's basically an old radio tube called a pentode, and it's got a little cap on it, and there's the USB. It comes in numerous sizes. This one's 32 gigs. It's not the fastest flash drive, it's just USB 2. It's got a little magnet in that cap too that just snaps it right on. It's pretty cool. And it glows orange when it's plugged in. It's very impractical. And if you don't know what steampunk is, it's imagine if today's technology existed in the 1800s, what it would look like. This actually comes from Latvia, and it's available on Amazon, and I'll make sure I have a link to it for those who are interested. It's a little pricey, but you know, look how cool that is. Now here's the completed computer. As you can see, I've got the cable management all completed here. I'll give you a view on the back side there. And from the front, here we go. People ask a lot about cable management, how to do it. There's no right or wrong way. You just use what cabling you have and what case you've got and do your best to what looks the most aesthetically pleasing. The cable management varies depending on what hardware you've got inside of the case and the case itself. So that's why it's not really practical for me to demonstrate how to do it. It's just really working with what you've got to make it look what's most appealing to your eye and to your abilities too. And I use a number of zip ties on this. I probably use about 40 zip ties, maybe a little less. Sometimes I zip tie them and then I realize I've got a cable that's tangled or I just don't like the way it looks. So when I say I'm using 40, I probably cut away half dozen of those in the process of figuring it out. And that's okay. They're very inexpensive. And like I said, there's not any real science to it. Now, you're probably wondering how fast this boots up. So as I mentioned before, I had already installed Windows 10, got it all updated and activated, as well as all the latest drivers. And in fact, today was the second Tuesday of the month, of course, Murphy's Law. So Microsoft released some more updates today that I had to put on there because I had updated it yesterday. Today's another day. Hopefully when filming, this all appears to take place at once, but do know that most of my videos take a few days at the minimum to film from start to finish. Now I'm going to go ahead and plug it in here and you'll see it boot to Windows 10 and there we go, here's power. Flip the switch on here. And I've got a little counter, little countdown timer here, which we can put right here. And let's see how long the system takes to boot up. So I'm going to start the counter first just to give the benefit to the counter. And now I'm going to turn the computer on. And I'm going to step around here so I can see what you're seeing. So we're at 12 seconds so far. We're at 17 seconds, 20 seconds. 20 seconds is about it. Now, it's still loading. As you can see, the lights flashing, so that tells you the hard drive is still reading, still active. Things like the Samsung Magician software they installed will load after everything else. But with the desktop up and the mouse pointer available, it's ready to start using. Now, if I turn the computer around here so you can see, let's get this out of the way, we don't need that anymore. You can see the fans turning. You can also see the little, what's called the audio LED here on the Gigabyte board that runs along this side. Of course, that's really there for nobody to see since this case will have no window on it. However, I believe that can be turned on and turned off in the BIOS if you don't like it. And I also updated the BIOS. In this case, I put a beta BIOS on this. I don't normally do that. However, the beta BIOS addressed a couple of issues I was concerned about. One was compatibility with the latest M.2 drives, and the other was an issue with the Skylake processors using the Prime 95 burn-in test software. Now, I'm not going to actually use Prime 95 on this. I'm very confident the system works, and I have no reason to run it. But I don't know if that issue that exists in the Prime 95 issue with the Skylake processors may rear its ugly head with something the customer is going to use. So I've gone ahead and put the beta BIOS on there. And it doesn't flash any differently. And of course, if you want to see how to do that, I've got a video showing how I flash an ASUS motherboard. And I've got another video that's in post-production showing how I flash a Gigabyte motherboard. That'll be coming out as soon as I have time. All right, the system is done, as you can see, so we can go ahead and shut it down. Now, of course, many of you may not know this, but you can actually just hit your power button and it'll run through the shutdown cycle as if you actually use the mouse. That's what this means. If you use the mouse and chose to shut down the computer. You can see all the fans have stopped, all the lights are out, the computer is off. So we can go ahead and unplug it, and now we can put our side panels back on. I always start with the cabling side first because sometimes you get a little resistance here depending on how thick the bundle of cables is there. So what I do is I lay the computer flat. In fact, let me turn it around so you can see what I'm doing. And let's turn this off because it's distracting. There we go. I'm going to grab the side panel that's solid. This side panel, the one that has no holes in it, is the one that's going to the back side of the computer. And it's got little tabs that are sticking out, and they go into these holes here on the side of the case. They're up on the top and the bottom. I'm going to put it almost all the way on, except for about a ½ inch away from the front, just like it came off. And I don't really feel much resistance from the cables. I can see that's really good. It's fitting really easy, and it just slides forward. And I just run my finger along the edges because it can be difficult to tell whether or not the tab is fit into the slot properly. And what it'll do is it'll get a little bubble, and it'll get worse over time as the metal will start to remember that shape. So I make sure that's nice and flush, and now I can use the 2 thumb screws on this panel to secure it, which I've got right here. And of course, if you remember in the very beginning of the video, I said to put these away. These will be the very last steps of your computer build. And we're just going to go ahead and put those right back in. There's one, and here's the other one. I always have to remember to remove my little Logitech wireless dongle for my keyboard and mouse. Actually shipped a computer to a customer and had to ask him to ship them back to me. I knew I was going to do it, so hopefully I'm only going to do it once. Now we can go ahead and bring this back up. Now this panel will go on real easy. Grab our remaining panel, of course the one with the holes on it here. These are for additional fans, which we don't need. They're just going to add noise and dust for this build. So just slide that one on there nice and easy, and then we'll secure that one in place with the last 2 thumb screws. There we go. Now, one of the final things I like to do is to place the Windows product key sticker up here on the top left corner. It doesn't really matter where it goes on the computer so long as it can be easily found by the customer or by a technician if Windows should ever need to be reinstalled. Now, for those of you wondering about the Windows installation process, I will be having a video coming out soon about how to install Windows 10, but if you follow the videos that I've already done on installing Windows 7 or installing Windows 8.1, it's the exact same process. There's nothing to be worried about. Pretty much you just put your boot disk in or your bootable USB drive and you follow the on-screen prompts. It's really that simple on a new build. On an existing build, it's a little more complicated depending on whether or not you've got your data backed up and whether or not you're willing to wipe the whole drive or you want to just install Windows. And perhaps that'll be the topic for a video one day, but for now, let me go ahead and get these stickers. So generally I put 3 stickers on a computer, and I don't like putting stickers on a computer at all, but, well, there's one sticker I do like putting on. We'll start with our product key for Windows 10. That's here on this envelope that the DVD came in. And only part of this sticker comes off. It's like, you gotta grab it from this edge. There we go. And this is one of those stickers that's designed to tear if it's ever attempted to be removed because they don't want you moving it to another computer. And just kind of keep it as straight as you can. We'll place that on there. And then the other issue I run into is customers will contact me years from now. Say, remember that computer you built for me a couple years ago? And I have no idea, because I built so many of them. and the customer has no idea. So what I do now is I make a sticker that's got the month and the year on it. In this case, it's February 2016, and I'm going to place that right below. And this sticker is easily removed. It's not like it's going to hurt the paint or anything on the case. If the customer decides they don't like it, they can certainly peel it right off. Not that I've met a customer yet that's done that, but I choose that type of a sticker for that reason. And finally, I've got my handcrafted by Carey Holzman badge with my signature on it. And I also have a few of these left that say inspired by Carey Holzman. So if you've built a computer and you'd like to support my YouTube channel, I still have the square ones. This is the square shape. And instead of saying handcrafted by, it says inspired by Carey Holzman. And I'll have a link that details how you can acquire one of those in the video notes below this video. Now what I do here, Corsair probably doesn't like, but my customer does not care who made the computer case or the motherboard. They just want the computer to work, and they want to know who to call when it doesn't. So this is a nice prominent position that's not gaudy, it doesn't stand out, and I just try my best to make it look like it belongs there, keeping it as straight and as centered as I can get it. And that's it. Here we go. I should stand over here, shouldn't I? There we go. Another one of my children that I'm very proud of building. It's right here, and I think this is going to make this customer very, very happy, and I hope that this is the first one I'm building for their computer lab, and I hope they're so impressed with it they want me to build the other 20 or 30 that they have. So it all starts with the first one, and this is how you grow your business. If you're thinking about getting into the business, you start with one, and if they like you and they like the product, hopefully they'll come back for more. That's going to wrap up this video. Also, as you may be aware, I'm also shooting videos for Newegg now. And if you like a more polished, faster paced rhythm to the videos, better lighting, multiple cameras, lots of close-ups, be sure and check out my videos at Newegg TV. And of course, I'll have a link to them below. I think I've done about 20 videos for them so far. Not only just build videos, but interviews as well. And I think right now we've got another 7 or 10 that are what we call in the can. They're filmed and they're just waiting for post-production, and it has to go through marketing approval, it's got to go through vendor approval, it's got to go through legal approval, and then of course it's got to go through the approval of the boss who looks at the edit and says that they like it. So a lot of approval processes there versus me in my kitchen where I just do whatever the heck I want. So if you're into that, if you like that style, the highly polished style, I'm very proud of those videos at Newegg, and I'm very happy to be working a couple days a month for them to produce content for them. And of course, I'm obviously still making the classic Carey videos here in my kitchen. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.